All right, welcome to another episode of NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we are talking about the Washington Commanders. That still feels weird to say. And I am joined
So weird.
by Conor Forrest, writer for RiggosRag, and also host of After Further Review podcast. How are you doing?
Dude, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's really awesome to be here. Really excited to chat some football with you, some Commanders with you.
Absolutely. And it is off season, but there's always something to talk about, especially now with free agency going on. And there's always something with the NFL. And I guess, first of all, I want to just kind of back up to that name. And what are your thoughts on the new Washington Commanders? And did you have another name that you maybe preferred over the Commanders?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two parts of the new name that you kind of break into. Is I think the transition from Redskins to Washington Football Team was it was kind of it was abrupt. It was a
Mhm.
really abrupt name change, and I think a lot of people in this area, if you're from this area, I'm from Northern Virginia, been in the DC area my whole life. It meant something to you. It hurt a lot of people. A lot of people were hurting from it, but I think as kind of time went on, I feel like personally, and I can't speak for everybody in this area, but I felt personally like after we went from Redskins to Washington Football Team, I never really had a strong feeling either way. You know, it felt like
Mhm.
once that chapter had closed, once that chapter was over, um, it didn't really matter. You know, for me personally. Now, Admirals was fun. We talked about
Mhm.
Red Hogs, bringing back the '80s Hogs.
Mhm.
Commanders had been out there since day one. I mean, I had heard people talk about Commanders the week that the Redskins retired their name, and
Mm.
it felt like that was just the name going, the whole way. Um, I didn't really have any strong feelings towards it, to be totally honest with you, because I think for me personally, when Redskins was retired, it was that was an end of an era, and I
Mhm.
really didn't feel like I'd get a strong feeling for a name back again, and quite frankly, I didn't. I haven't. Um, I think with a new name, though, it comes down to like everything in football, right? When the Washington Commanders are in the wild card round, they're in the division round, they're in the conference round. They could be called the idiots, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't matter. I think fans we're 2 decades into a quarterback search. We're 3 decades removed from a Super Bowl. Um, I think at this point they're ready for anything to do with a win. And there's a W on the helmet. If we can get some W's in the score sheet, I think that'll mean a lot more than anything else.
Absolutely. Well, let's kind of get into that quarterback thing, and maybe there's W on the helmet for the new quarterback as well. What are your thoughts on Carson Wentz to the Commanders?
Yeah, this was something. This was crazy. It did come out of left field in a lot of ways. Like everything in the NFL, right? I mean, it is a
Mhm.
12. I mean, everything comes out of left field. I mean, this offseason is a great synopsis of that.
Mhm.
Um, I think as time has gone on, funny enough, I think the Carson Wentz signing has sat better for me. When this first came out, it was like, dude, you've got to be kidding me. Like this is, and in a sense, I still feel a little bit of that, right? I do feel in a sense that this is kicking the can down the road at that quarterback. Young guy, you're not finding a guy who you can build around for years and years to come. Do I think it's impossible for Carson Wentz to be successful? No. I don't think it's likely. And I think what we've seen in the last 2 years is closer to what Carson Wentz was than that 2017 season. Um, I think a lot of the disappointment people felt initially was, hey, we just missed out on Russell Wilson. Oh, we just
Mhm.
missed out on the possibility of Aaron Rodgers. What about
Mhm.
Deshaun Watson? And while I think Russell Wilson was the closest that came to reality, I think fans in this area talked themselves into those three way more than they were more likely going to end up, happening, if that makes any sense. So I think a lot of people felt more disappointed about missing out on Russell Wilson. And I think that's where a lot of the angst came from the Carson Wentz signing. But I think as time has gone on, look, I'd take Carson Wentz over Marcus Mariota right now. I take
Mm.
Carson Wentz over Mitch Trubisky right now.
I was
You
just
know,
gonna
you
ask
just
that. Yeah.
yeah, you start kind of going through the list of what were the other options. Um, I feel like at that point, I think it sits a little bit better for sure.
It's so interesting because you look at the Mitchell Trubisky with the Steelers, and that really is kind of a low risk possibility for them. Depending on
Sure.
kind of what they do. And maybe this is as well. I mean, I don't know, how much of a commitment they really made. Obviously their contracts come out, but how much of a commitment they're Washington's really making toward Carson Wentz, and if he doesn't do well this year, he's got to be done as a starting quarterback, right?
You feel like it, right? It
Mm-hmm.
definitely starts to feel that way, because we've seen in Washington, we got a first, we got a first row seat at what RG3 went through, right? And there was two parts of
Mm-hmm.
RG3's game that seemed to fall apart, and it was the physical side, which clearly after his knee injury, he just wasn't the same. And then right after that, right into 2013, 14, and 15, it was the mental side that he just couldn't quite link up. He couldn't get his confidence back. He couldn't get his real. I mean, it was as his athleticism took a step back, but he was just missing throws. Like he was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league, 2012, and from that point on, I mean, he was just missing guys wide open. And in a sense, we've seen that a little bit with Carson Wentz, where
Mm-hmm.
his physical ability has clearly taken a step back from where it was in that MVP level 2017 season. But how does that mental level? Where is he mentally? Right? It's how big of a red flag is it that the Colts go out of their way to make a huge trade, give some big draft capital into bringing a guy in, and then just a year later, they part from him. That's really kind of my biggest thing that I saw with him. I was like, what does this mean? What is that going to look like? Do I think it's likely that he steps up and he goes for 4,000 yards this year and has 30 touchdowns, 7 picks? No, but I do think that with that being said, it's an upgrade. I do think Carson Wentz is an upgrade, and that's kind of where I always try to segue at the end of it is better than Taylor Heineke, which a great story, but Taylor Heineke was clearly a backup quarterback. Better than injured Alex Smith, better than Dwayne Haskins was, clearly better than Kyle Allen. So I think in the last 3 years, I think he's the best quarterback we've had on our team since Kirk Cousins. It's not to take away from, I mean, he's got an arm. He still has an arm. We saw that in Indianapolis last year. So I think there's a ton of different angles to go at this Carson Wentz thing. And it's ironic that just a couple years ago, we were just sweating every time the Eagles came to FedEx Field. Washington had to go up and play Philly because, gosh, Carson Wentz is just going to tear us up. And it's amazing that just a couple short years later, we're sitting here having the discussion of, hey, is Carson Wentz a good quarterback anymore? And now he's ours. So pretty wild story, huh?
Yeah, and when you look at it, of maybe obviously him being a step up from what Washington has had, when you look at his receivers, is it a step up from what he had in Indy, like with Terry McLaurin, and what is Terry McLaurin's ceiling there?
Yeah, that's the golden question, especially going into the draft. I think that's the biggest thing that Washington's going to have to address. The big free agent signing last offseason here for Washington was Curtis Samuel. And it was a guy who, a slot receiver. This guy's a running back. This guy can play on the outside. He can run the seam. He can go down the field. I mean, he can run in between the tackles. I mean, he's a Swiss Army knife in a sense. A lot of people felt like, hey, this guy's a Deebo Samuel style receiver. And last year he was constantly injured, had zero impact whatsoever. And so there's a lot of questions as to, hey, where's that part 2 for Terry McLaurin? Because Terry McLaurin, as we know, he's a star. He's a star receiver. And
he's almost quarterback proof, right?
And how many times have we been able to? I think the only receiver in Washington I think I've seen genuinely be quarterback proof is going back to Santana Moss. I mean, that's going back to him back in the 2000s and into the early 2010s. But it is absolutely remarkable what he's been able to do with the lack of stability. I mean, the lack of offensive coordinating stability, the lack of stability at the quarterback position, the talent around him. It's a great. I mean, the ceiling for Terry McLaurin, I can't. Sky's the limit for him. I don't think there's a ceiling because we've seen how good he can be with the lack of talent at the quarterback position. But I do think it's going to be imperative for Washington going into the draft. Maybe it's late free agency. We've seen Deshaun Jackson signed with them back when they signed him, and I believe it's 2014 they signed him. I believe they signed him in late April. So you never know with these late free agency cuts, training camp cuts. Maybe you get a veteran talent in there. But I think this draft is going to be full of wide receivers that you got to stockpile up on and try to build Carson Wentz some support.
I would say, yeah, I mean, speaking of wide receivers, so I actually I live in Wisconsin, yet I'm a Bears fan. So I hear a little bit of both. Yeah, it's interesting. And the pipe dream for a lot of Packer fans now is that they would trade for McLaurin and try to kind of, get him. And the Commanders aren't going to, give up on McLaurin, are they? And trade him?
I don't see a path towards that. I think right now the talk is, I think between now and training camp, you're going to see a long-term deal in place for Terry McLaurin. I don't know what exactly it's going to look like. I think it could look like a Christian Kirk style deal. But I don't see them going quite out to do that, because I do think that what Washington has lacked in the last 10 years is what they're trying to build in the last 3 years with guys like John Allen and Terry McLaurin and Chase Young. Some foundational pieces, right? Anytime they got a piece of gold, you don't want to run to the pawn shop and just sell it and cash it out. You want to build. You want to give yourself targets. Like, again, Terry McLaurin has now made Washington an offensive destination that quarterbacks otherwise, if he was out of the picture, who's Carson Wentz throwing to at all? Cam Sims. I don't know if half our listeners even know who Cam Sims is if you're not in this area. So I think he's staying put. I think between now and training camp, you're going to get a long-term deal for Terry McLaurin. I hope so, at least, because not only is he a star on the field, but one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And on top of that, just a locker room staple. And everyone loves watching and playing with Terry McLaurin. So I just can't say enough good things about 17.
Yeah, and when you're looking at kind of what the Washington's trying to build with a new, team, and obviously going through a lot of other stuff we can talk about later as well with the ownership, they need as many kind of marketable stars as possible. And my question would be, how much fan capital does the team have if there's not a winner this year, maybe the year after? I mean, do they really kind of need to take a step forward in wins and losses, or, they're really going to lose a lot of the fan base? Or
yeah, I'll tell you, for fans who have gone out to FedEx Field, I think you're, especially in this last 2 years or 3 years, you've really visually seen the decay of the fan base in a lot of ways where, again, like I said, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of Washington Super Bowl just last year. 30 years since our last Super Bowl. And in that time, we really just haven't had any success. And I think there's a huge, when you have long-term losing like this, what ends up happening is you've got yourself a little generation divide, right? You've got people of my age, right, or under the age of 30 who haven't seen Super Bowls. They have only been told about the glory years. They've only been told about John Riggins and Joe Theismann and Doug Williams and Mark Rippon and the Hogs. Those are things we were not around for. And then you have the people, the next generation, right? You get the 35, 40-year-olds and up who remember those good days. They remember the Redskins days, and they don't recognize this team anymore, and they feel left out, right? And I think that's a lot of times what the name change really made a lot of people feel that way. It was, hey, I'm being kicked out. I'm being left out. You're deciding to move on and welcome a new young generation and new jerseys and new name and new everything. And we're just going to be kind of cast aside. I think that's where a lot of fans feel the disconnect. I think for Washington, there's two ways to win this back. The biggest one is winning, obviously, right? You have to win. But most importantly, if you're not going to win, go down trying. Like, I played goalie in soccer, high school soccer. I played for a season. My coach always said something really funny. He said, listen, if you're going to let a goal in, you better be on the ground. If you're on the ground and you let a goal in, that's fine. But you can't have a goal in and you can't be standing, right? And I think that's kind of the analogy I use for Washington is be on the ground. If you're going to let a goal in, if you're going to come up with a losing season, you got to be on the ground. You got to take your swing. You got to give it a shot.
So, that's an interesting point. And I had a chance to interview, obviously, right after it happened, a Browns writer, and like a lot of the fans were just, and still are, like, upset and, getting rid of their season tickets and stuff.
Yep.
Which, all this, moral stuff aside with what he did, Deshaun Watson did, and, still all of the, civil lawsuits and whatnot.
Yeah.
He really is, top-notch football player, and they swung for the fences for wins and losses, right?
Yep.
And when you look at some of the teams, they haven't really necessarily done that. Even you look at Washington. I remember back the Steve Spurrier days and all that, and it's just, they tried. They really, I remember them trying to, swing for the fences and getting all of this, talent, high priced talent on the back end of their careers and trying to, build it that way. And, so when you look at the talent, with Wentz, it's probably not a home run with the fan base. How would you equate that in, baseball terms? Is it like a double at least?
I would say it's I would say it's more of a single because
Oh, yeah.
I do genuinely think that we're going to be right back to where we were this time in 365 days. I think if we
Yeah.
had a podcast this time in 365 days, I think I would be saying the same thing. Hey, we're looking for that next quarterback. Is it in the draft? Is it in free agency? Um, I just think that's. I think what Washington look. If you looked at the playoffs in our last playoffs, I mean,
Mhm.
it's a league of have and have nots, right? I
Mhm.
mean, there is a formula to win in football, and it's a very clear formula. It's one that's tried and proven. And just look at the great teams in the league, and I'll tell you one thing they have, and that's a quarterback. And I think
Mhm.
Washington has spent the last few years building backwards. I don't think you build a winning franchise through a defense. I don't think you build a winning
Mhm.
franchise by getting everything but the quarterback. I think teams that have found a way to turn their franchises around, the Bills, for example, we're going to see how Trevor Lawrence plays out in Jacksonville, but
Mhm.
the Cardinals, teams that have historically not been great, they're building through elite young quarterbacks. And that's just how it's done. I have always been frustrated with over the years how you feel like, hey, Washington need to dedicate every waking moment to finding that quarterback. And look, they've made their swings. Dwayne Haskins, they made their swing with trying to bring in Alex Smith on the end of his career, and both of those for totally different reasons completely whiffed.
Mhm.
And I just think that at the end of the day, when you just look back on last year's draft, where you had opportunities to go get a guy like Justin Fields, who was kind of in your reach, Mac Jones was right underneath your nose. You could have gone up and gotten him. And they just didn't. They didn't. And for
Mhm.
better or worse, whatever that is, it just shows to me. And you take a linebacker in the first round that was not very good this year. So
Mhm.
um, I think that's where the frustration is, right? It's go down swinging, right? If you're gonna strike out, twist around the base and fall down, because I want you swinging for the fences on this. And if you miss because you took your shot, so what? But don't miss standing there and letting the ball go right past you and into the catcher's mitt, right?
Right, exactly. So at least you're on base.
Yeah.
But a big part of it too is kind of matching that coaching staff with the quarterback. And I saw that in Chicago. I mean, Mitchell Trubisky. I mean, we'll see how he does if he starts to kind of do well in Pittsburgh. But you have to have a coaching staff that's gonna
Right.
get the most out of their talent. And there's no way that Nagy was ready. For that with Fields, and that's why he's gone. And
Yep.
so with that, with the Commanders, I mean, do you really trust kind of Ron Rivera to kind of be that guy to kind of lead the Commanders into the playoffs and hopefully eventually a Super Bowl?
It's hard to know for sure. Like, we're heading into a really, really important year for Ron Rivera. I mean, this is as
Mhm.
important of a year as he's going to have. And it really is a sense. This is now his time. He's had his roster. He's had his opportunity to build his roster. But the reality is that he's had enough time now to either find that franchise quarterback or this roster is a reflection of Ron Rivera. So I think completely
Mhm.
from top to bottom, he's had his fingerprints all over this now. There's no more blaming the old regime. There's no more, hey, this is a draft pick that kind of landed on my lap like Dwayne Haskins did.
Mhm.
This is a big one. I think I've had some questions about Ron Rivera's ability to evaluate talent. To be
Mhm.
honest with you, I think we haven't drafted very well. Last year's draft, and I know it's been 1 year, but last year's draft has not panned out well at all, starting with our first round pick and then working our way down. I
Mhm.
think our most impactful player really from last year's draft was a fourth round tight end who was a great blocker, really. And that says a lot. Um, I think Ron Rivera does have so much respect in the locker room, and
Mm.
you can tell guys love playing for
Absolutely.
him. And in a way, I think that that's something that Washington hasn't had here. I really think going back, since Joe Gibbs 2.0 when he came back in
Mhm.
the mid 2000s there. But I, it's hard to know for sure. I'm on the fence a little bit, and I love Ron Rivera as a guy. I think he's a stand up person, and I do think he's a great coach. I do think that most of the staff that he's built around him are a lot of his buddies from Carolina,
Mhm.
and I think we could be doing better there. To be honest with you,
Mhm.
in terms of building a staff around him that kind of challenge him. But I lean towards trusting him. I really do, just because he's a great leader.
Mhm.
But I do have some questions about the talent evaluation, because I just think there have been moves, all over the place in the last 18 months that really have kind of left my head scratching a little bit. But Look, if it's any time, it's now. And I think for Ron Rivera,
Mhm.
I think he knows that. So this year's going to be a really, really pivotal year for him for sure.
Yeah, and we talked about Terry McLaurin, and also, I mean, when you look at the running backs, someone I've been high on my dynasty radar has been Antonio Gibson, and
Mhm.
and you've got him, and now like JD McKissick, and that was kind of an interesting thing with him, you know. Thinking he was going to be going to the Bills and now coming back. I mean, what are your expectations kind of for the
Yeah.
two of them? Because McKissick seemed to have a fantastic year. Even with
Oh
Gibson
yeah.
in there, right?
Oh, he really did. I mean, JD McKissick was one of those guys that the offense ran through. I mean,
Hmm.
it's weird to say that, but if you watched more than 50% of a game at any point of Washington last year, you notice that the biggest step back, the biggest trouble that Taylor Heineke had was his arm strength. He couldn't really push the ball downfield the way Terry McLaurin was not set up for success in that way. In fact, I think he got injured a couple times on just underthrows he had to come back for, and he got lit up.
Hmm.
It's not to disrespect Taylor Heineke, but it's the reality of what was going on. So J.D. McKissick was that guy who came out of the backfield, and Taylor Heineke leaned on, and he knew it.
Hmm.
I think Taylor Heineke knew what J.D. McKissick brought to the team. And I mean, underneath his speed, I don't think we've had speed in the backfield in years this team has had since J.D. McKissick. And I think it is a really good 1-2 punch. Antonio Gibson really struggled with fumbles last year, which was a little bit alarming. Um, I still love Antonio Gibson as a patient runner. He's kind of he's a very upright runner. He's very balanced. Like his shoulders and his hips are very aligned. He kind of runs a little bit to me like Le'Veon Bell in a sense where he's very patient. He really reads running really well. And I've loved watching him since coming out of Memphis, and he can catch out of the backfield. I think the biggest thing for him is going to be staying healthy and then controlling those fumbles, right? Because I mean that's the biggest killer for running backs. And J.D. McKissick, I think, from the backfield takes so much pressure off a quarterback who, if you're coming off play action, if you're coming off a long developing play that you need something underneath instead of having to force the ball, that's where he steps in. And that's where he did such a good job last year. And I expect him to continue that role. With that being said, I do think J.D. McKissick's, obviously his targets are going to go down this year. And I think his impact is going to go down slightly because I do think Carson Wentz is just going to push the ball downfield more. I think he's going to utilize Terry McLaurin better in that way. But with that being said, I mean, J.D. McKissick is an all-around running back that I'm so glad we have back. And I was really concerned when he went to Buffalo that Washington hadn't made an effort to bring him back. And obviously in kind of a weird way, which has happened all offseason, by the way, across the league. He decides to 180 and come on right back to the nation's capital. So couldn't be happier for that. And I think that's a huge part of this offense that now you can check that box off of another thing that Washington's going to need this offseason. I think the running back room is now shored up.
Yeah, in Gibson, he's still in his rookie deal, right?
Yes, he is.
So, it was got like 2 years left. And I guess, I mean, that would be my question then. I mean, what would it take for him to kind of earn, a big money contract?
I do think that if he can find a way, I mean, number one, you got to hold on to the football. I mean, he had some back-breaking fumbles. I mean, it goes to week 1, the first game of the year. The Chargers, I mean, Washington had the lead, 7 minutes left to go. They go burn some clock and kick a field goal. The game is over. And he fumbles inside his own 10-yard line, and the Chargers take it, and that's kind of that sealed the deal for the Chargers to come back and win that game. He had a number of those fumbles at really inopportune times. I think the biggest thing for him, it's not fixable. I mean, look at what Adrian Peterson was able to do, right? I mean, he had serious fumbling issues, and he was able to kind of correct those. So it's not. I mean, that's got to be 1, 2, and 3 priority for him is to limit those. And most importantly, I mean, finding a way to stay healthy. I mean, those are, I mean, really fumbling and not staying healthy are the 2 biggest ways for running backs to leave the league. If he can shore that up, and I think J.D. McKissick to kind of take a little bit more of the role of running between the tackles, take a little bit of that load off of him, I think he can be really productive. I think he's the kind of guy that can get to 1,000 rushing yards without a doubt. He's done it before. I think he can obviously be a receiver out of the backfield. I mean, his rookie year, he was just he had over 10 touchdowns in his rookie year. So, I mean, he has all the skills in the world. And again, he was a college receiver. So this guy can line up just about anywhere on the field and kind of make it happen. Funny enough, both JD McKissick and Antonio Gibson, both college receivers.
I didn't know about McKissick.
Pretty funny how they both made that transition really well. But I think JD McKissick picks up where Antonio Gibson leaves off and vice versa. So I do think for him to really take that next step, to get that contract, to be the guy moving forward in the league, got to stay healthy, got to limit the fumbles. It's just really the two biggest things that they got to work on.
Absolutely. And you talked about receivers. I mean, we talked obviously about Terry McLaurin, but what about, and I always wonder, is it Dyami Brown?
Yep, you got it. Yeah, first strike. That's it.
Yeah, and so kind of where is his place kind of on in the pecking order, and is he kind of worth I guess fantasy wise, is he worth being a dynasty kind of sleeper or anything like that?
It's such a bummer because I was so high on Dyami Brown coming out of the draft last year. I mean, his route running was iffy, but I mean, unbelievable hands, unbelievable athleticism. He high pointed balls. Again, great hands. He's just a guy that I loved, and I was so happy that Washington was able to snag him. I think with guys of his size that are a little bit smaller and guys that struggle with route running a little bit, I do think that tends to lead to a little bit of a rougher transition to the NFL. I mean, if you just kind of go throughout the list of guys who, we talked about that with DK Metcalf a little bit. Hey, is this guy a good route runner? But his size was able to kind of offset a bit of that. It's really, I still have a lot of hope in Dyami Brown. I really, really do. I think he is a guy that can really step up and make a big impact on this offense. I think Cam Sims is that totally different receiver. He's a completely different guy. He's a bigger dude. He's a guy fades in the end zone, 6'5", big Alabama receiver came out of Alabama. I really like these guys. I will say I want another game changer dropped into the mix here, right? McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, if he can come back healthy, Sims, Dyami Brown. I'd love somebody else. I know Adam Humphries came in last year as a free agent addition, and he was pretty shifty, and he I think his I know this is clearly not true, but I felt like every catch he made was on 3rd and 3. Like he was just kind of a 3rd and 3. If you need 3 yards, he's going to get you 4. If you need 10 yards, he's going to get you 4, right? He's that kind of guy. But I'd love for somebody else to kind of drop into that mix. I mean, I love both Dyami Brown and Cam Sims as guys that are, I think Cam Sims is a dude who has left the practice squad and active roster practice squad. I think he's been back and forth the last 3 years, maybe 38 times, numbers approximate. But I think he's here to stay. I think Washington went out of their way to make sure they extended him and made sure that they had him. But I'm high on both of these guys. I will say if I had to pick on one of them that I like the most, I think Dyami Brown's got a really big future. And I'm saying that based off of nothing rookie year. I just think he's got the skill set to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you see talent, it's definitely apparent. And when you look at kind of the tight end position, Logan Thomas is coming back, right?
Yes. Yeah. Logan Thomas is coming back. He did have his ACL tear, right? So he's not going to be ready for a little while. And it was towards the later end of the season that he tore his ACL. So he unfortunately was not. I think his transition is going to be a little bit longer.
Because he's got talent, but he's been injured, quite a bit in his career, I believe.
Yeah, he has. The funny thing is again, everyone knows this at this point, and if you don't, it's pretty interesting how he was a quarterback at Virginia Tech and makes that transition in the NFL. Now he was drafted and came into the NFL as a quarterback, but made this transition into the tight end role, and really it was only until he came to Washington that he completely exploded. As a receiving talent, as somebody who great routes, really physical, hard to take down, like incredible hands. I do think for him though, and it's funny in that vein of when you make that transition from quarterback to tight end, most tight ends coming into the NFL from college and playing high school, you got some wear and tear on your body. And for him, it's different, right? You have a different type of wear and tear on your body. So his knees are not quite what a 25-year-old NFL tight end would be, right? They're a little fresher. But with that being said, it's in the technique of playing the position that you learn how to block, you learn how to maneuver yourself. You learn the ins and outs of playing the position technically sound so that you're not dealing with injuries. So I think that's going to be something to watch. But I do think that's going to be something that Washington's going to have to address as well this offseason is that tight end position. Like I said, John Bates is who they got in the 4th round. He's their tight end who I think had a really he stood out in a big way as a as a blocker. But he towards the end of the season showed that he could play as a receiver as well. But I do think maybe throwing one more guy in there. We lost Ricky Seals-Jones in free agency, so I think having another guy in there to try to add a little bit of a veteran presence can't hurt anybody, right?
Yeah, the tight end is such a an important position in NFL offenses nowadays. Teams are like taking big and swings and misses,
Oh yeah.
at the position just to make sure they have it, solidified. I mean, because you look at these defenses and they're able to really, even lock down some of the best receivers. If you have a tight end that can really, do both blocking and spread the defense even out, and make solid catches, that really will, help the offense be successful.
Yeah, and I mean I've said for a long time on my podcast, I tight end is my favorite position of football, and quite frankly, I'd say outside linebacker, it's the most evolved position in the sport. I mean, really think about what tight ends were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and what they are now. They're glorified receivers, really. I mean, think about the guys, back in the 90s who they were just extra tackles, really, and if they made a catch or so, fantastic. Washington had one in Jordan Reed. I mean, just look around the league with when Zach Ertz was in his prime. You look around at George Kittle, look Travis Kelce. I mean, these guys who they extend an offense, they expand a playbook more than you could possibly imagine. I mean, because linebackers, I mean, they can't keep up with them. Safeties are too small. Corners are too small. I mean, if you have somebody who can run routes, I mean, they can block like a tackle and run routes like a receiver. I mean, it's very, very difficult to defend a tight end, especially a good one. And teams that can nail that position and get game change of that position, like they open up their playbook in a way that it's really hard to break down on one podcast. It would take basically 2 novels.
Absolutely. Well, shout out to Tight End University, my Iowa Hawkeyes.
Yeah, man. I mean, talk about the tight ends that come out of that place.
I love what George Kittle has done, and I guess I was going to ask if Logan Thomas got invited to Tight End University or not.
That's a great question. I actually don't know. I don't know. I wonder if that's the case. I mean, he should be. I mean, you look at that guy's film. I mean, that guy should be. He's fantastic. I mean, like I said, I mean, to watch him evolve from somebody who I remember where I was when we signed Logan Thomas. I was doing some writing, and I remember there was just kind of this slew of offseason additions that kind of came in, and Logan Thomas here, blah, blah, blah. These guys will be out of here in the second week of training camp. And to just kind of fast forward now and realize, he just makes the offense better. I mean, the team is better when Logan Thomas is healthy, which is just incredible to say.
It's interesting because, obviously the quarterback is the most, important position in NFL. So much so as like, even if, an also ran quarterback that's failed in a few places like Wentz or some of the other ones will get multiple chances to kind of I don't know, make it, and I feel like the tight end position is almost that way now too. I mean, you got Gerald Everett bouncing around. I mean, if they if they've got the talent, they're going to get a shot, and it's so interesting to kind of see.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, how long was like Richard Rodgers bouncing around the NFL?
Yes.
We're like, what is going on here? Like, how's this guy keep getting jobs?
Yes.
But it's true, because I think so many of these offensive coordinators not only realize how important they are, how I realize, but they realize that, hey, if we have an extra receiver, like, I mean, the ways that you can use them, the ways that now, you're taking guys out of the backfield, you can read options and spreads and things like that. I mean, just ask any, I mean, guys like Dawson Knox who have opened up. Dallas have had great tight ends, unfortunately for me watching them, but they've had great tight ends for years. I mean, go from Jason Witten, Dalton Schultz. I mean, down the Blake Jarwin, a guy who goes out and gets a big contract with Jacksonville. So, I mean, it's my favorite position on the field. It's so versatile. It's such an ever evolving position. And it's so when a tight end takes over a game, I get so excited. Most of my friends who know me know that I get so steamed up to talk about tight ends. I love those guys.
Absolutely. And another player I'm sure you're probably excited to talk about is Chase Young. And where is he? I mean, is he going to be fully ready for 2022? I mean, I'm trying to think back when he got injured, and I mean, is he going to be able to just kind of still dominate the way he had?
Yep, it was kind of towards the middle half of the first half, so the first quarter of the season where he got hurt, and he will be ready. I mean, I know you remember this, but when I was younger, I remember ACL tears were
Mhm.
career threatening, right? When somebody tore their ACL, you wondered, oh my gosh, are they ever going to play again? And it's unbelievable to think, oh, he tears his ACL, this guy will be back in 8 months.
Mhm.
It's remarkable how far that's progressed. Um, Really excited for Chase Young. I mean, I mean, it was a really, really disappointing campaign this last year
Mhm.
for Chase Young, which there's not really any other way to put it. I mean, I think he would be the first to tell you that. The whole defense was a real letdown. I think
Mhm.
in part because I think his rookie season they weren't playing great talent, so I think a lot of that defense was bolstered by a little bit of a weaker schedule. But I think he was trying to do a bit too much. I think he was trying to
Mhm.
do too much. I think he was putting too much on his plate. I think we've seen this with guys who just want to do too much, and overextend themselves. I think that's kind of what Chase fell victim to. I'm really excited to see how he progresses coming into 2022. Obviously, as a second overall pick, I mean, this is you take someone second overall, there's an expectation there that they're in a gold jacket one day, right? I mean, that's just
Right.
kind of what the expectation is for the fans as well. But there's not really going to be someone more hungry to come back than Chase Young, um,
Yeah.
and I'm excited to see it. I mean, it was disappointing, but I do think that the whole defense really had a down year, and I think Jack Del Rio was kind of trying to fit the pieces in properly, and I think they were getting a little bit too fancy. And like I said, they played a much more difficult schedule, like a much more difficult schedule. They were constantly playing really good teams. So I think when things balance out and they're able to kind of head into now his third year, have a little bit of time under his belt to get more comfortable with the system. I really want to see him make a really big jump here in 2022 for sure.
Yeah, you brought up Jack Del Rio, and it was funny because I remember watching, a game last year. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's still around, and he kind of that obviously Ron
The guy
Rivera.
who used to wear a suit when he was coaching. Love that.
Yeah, he's been all over the place,
He
and so
has.
that's hopefully they can take a step forward because I was fantasy wise I picked Washington defense and I thought they were going to be solid.
Yeah,
You
I did
know,
too.
and when you kind of look at it, you talked about too much on Chase Young's plate. I mean, are there some draft pieces that would kind of fit on the defensive plate that you're kind of targeting? Any specific kind of needs?
Yeah, I mean the big thing really is that middle linebacker position's got to be
Hmm.
shored up. I mean they've been shuffling around linebackers and they've got those edge rushers. You got the Montez Sweat and the Chase Young. You obviously you part ways with Ryan Kerrigan, but their depth took a hit this just the last few weeks. I mean Matt Ioannidis gone. As well as Tim Settle gone. Those are two really big pieces that a lot of people, again, around the NFL might not know their name, but they're remarkably important rotational pieces. It's able to give Daron Payne and John Allen some breaks as they kind of rotate themselves in. Um, obviously that middle linebacker position is going to be the biggest thing. I'd say those are two really important needs. I think their safety situation is figured out with Bobby McCain and Cam Curl on the roster. You let go of Landon Collins, and I think he's going to be a post June 6th cut, I believe is how that's going to work out. And that's going to open up
Uh-huh.
some cap space for you. But I do think that middle linebacker position is going to be number one, most important. I think obviously getting some depth and maybe a cornerback here and there. But I think, like I said, that middle linebacker position has been a problem. I think really, to be honest with you, since London Fletcher left,
Mm-hmm.
to be
He
totally
was,
frank with you,
yeah.
and he was a brick wall. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that they've been trying to find that guy at the middle linebacker position. They've had great edge rushers, but yeah, I think that's going to be a big target for them.
One huge question I have about the defense as well is Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen, are they actually going through counseling together?
Yeah. Oh man, that was so rough. I mean, of course, on national TV. By the way, you couldn't do
Yeah.
it on a local broadcast. God forbid, we had to do it on Sunday Night Football, while we're getting, just kicked around by our arch rivals.
Hmm.
Um, it's what was so like striking about that whole thing. I think nationally, people realize, hey, those guys were teammates. They get along. They're good friends. But really, in this area, um, those guys are like brothers. Like really, they are. I mean,
Hmm. Hmm.
they're so close, and it was so weird to see that kind of transpire the way it did. Where you're going, I mean, I know it sounds if Daron Payne didn't kind of move aside. I mean, John Allen loaded up. I mean, that guy would have broken his nose. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no doubt that there was going to be an injury involved in that kind of scuffle. But I think it brought to light, to be honest with you, the fact that these guys just want to win so bad. And, we can talk all we want about losing franchises, drafting SEC guys, but John Allen and Deron Payne don't know what losing is. They didn't know what losing was until they came to Washington. I mean, these guys have been winning football games since they were in Pop Warner football. John Allen went to high school 4 minutes away from where I live in Ashburn. And I mean, he's a local dude. He was a star then. I remember him being a star high school player when I lived in the area. And now he's signing a huge contract to be one of the best defensive linemen, interior linemen in football. These guys just want to win so bad. I mean, they do. There's such a desire to win. There's such a desire to succeed. And after a while, when you're not doing that, these guys are humans. I mean, these guys are warriors. They're putting on pads. They're going out there and they're hitting each other. And tempers can obviously flare, but the two of those guys are game changers on the defensive line. They really do solidify this defense. And when they're on the same page, this team is winning. It's just simple as that. And I think that kind of really brought a stark like, oh my goodness, we got to fix something here. So God willing that happens here in knock on all the wood in the world here in 2022.
Well, yeah. And with that, what are your expectations kind of coming into the season? Obviously this is before the draft and everything. I mean, when you look at it, I mean, the division really is winnable. I mean, I look at the Eagles maybe as a threat. I just cannot see the Cowboys as a threat as long as they have McCarthy as a coach. I mean, they've got all the talent. They're going to probably take a step back, with receiver wise. And I mean, what are your expectations then for the Commanders this year?
It's a great question. I mean, I do feel, funny enough, it's kind of odd. I feel like the NFC East just got worse, like collectively. I don't think any team made any great moves. I am not a believer in Jalen Hurts whatsoever as a starting quarterback. I think he has great athletic ability. I don't think he's a franchise guy. Dallas, man. Like, I don't know really what else to say. Like, I mean, I think last year they had as good of a roster as I stacked a roster against anyone in the NFL, honestly. Honest to God. And
especially defensively,
especially defensively. I mean, forget the fact that the receiving core is as good as anyone in football. I think Dak Prescott's a great quarterback. I think with Tony Pollard and Z, I mean, they just, their offensive line there. I mean, I don't know what else they could have done. And I can imagine Jerry Jones just beside himself constantly, just thinking about them not being able to win one playoff game. But no, to answer your question, I think Washington improves this year. I see them as a team that probably wins 8 or 9 games. They could hit the 10 win range. I think, look, Carson Wentz is an upgrade, no matter how you see it, whether you think he's a long-term option, whether you think this is kicking the can down the road. I do genuinely think that they improve this year. I see 9 wins if I were a betting man. I put 9 wins on the table. I think a good draft, getting a good receiver, bolstering that offense a little bit, get a lot of the returning cast on the defensive side. So I think an offseason later, Jamin Davis, hopefully he progresses into a decent linebacker. I mean, he really struggled rookie year, but if that defense can kind of take that step up and find the middle ground between 2 years ago and last year, and that offense, I think if Carson Wentz can give you, I think he gives you more than anything Taylor Heineke could have given you. So I think that alone, with a little bit of an easier schedule, I'd say 9 wins if I was a betting man, to be honest with you. I don't see them making a playoff run. I don't see them as contenders, but I do think that they are improved. And I think in a weak NFC East, that's a good thing, right? We'll take it.
Well, yeah, I mean, so if they do make the playoffs, then, I mean, will that kind of be, the ceiling for the team, and just, kind of say, okay, well, this team is kind of making a run and this team does have a positive future. I mean, or, if they regress and maybe only have a few wins, I mean, is that just kind of like, I don't know, maybe you won't see like a plan to get to the, playoffs anytime soon.
Yeah, I do. Like I said, I think this is the most important year for Ron Rivera, hands down. I mean, hands down. I think for him, this has got to be look, I always say, by the time December comes around, you're in mid-December leading up to Christmas, you got to be relevant. Like, you have to be playing meaningful games. You have to be sitting there saying, hey, we're in it for the division, or we're in it for a wild card. I mean, again, we said it a couple times now, go down swinging. If you go down week 17, week 18, and you're right in the thick of things, and things don't fall your way, or a hot team knocks you out, or you lose in week 18 and in a win or go home, fine. Maybe that's a little more palatable. But the reality is this has got to be a team that makes some sort of appearance into the playoffs. And every year we see teams in the playoffs that don't really belong. I mean, we see this, right? We see teams
yeah.
This is it. I mean, I would argue Washington when they got in 2 years ago, right? Where it's just kind of like they just got in on a losing record. They don't belong to be here. But that really is a way to build a winning culture. I do think that it means something, and a lot of people would argue against it. A lot of people would say, hey, winning meaningless football games don't mean anything. You're just hurting your draft position. It does mean something. Like for me, it means something as a fan, but for those guys in the locker room, it means something. They want to feel like they're building towards something. You know, you don't want to be in your, I mean, can you imagine being in your job, wherever you're working, and just year after year, you're kind of getting paid a little bit less, and you're just you're not getting any promotion. You're just getting a little bit out of your paycheck. It's just like, no one wants that. No one wants that at all. So I would say, yeah, to your point, I think the playoffs are, I think it's kind of a do or die year where you just make it to the playoffs, figure it out. And if you're not there, there better be a really good reason. Carson Wentz gets hurt and the season goes off the rail again, something along those lines. But yeah, I think this is a playoff or bust kind of year for Washington. I think they have the tools to do it, but we'll definitely see.
Well, after further review, this has been a lot of fun. So where can everyone find you again?
Yeah, it's awesome. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate it. So it's at Conor Forrest _ on Twitter. You'll find me there. Again, after further review with Conor Forrest is the podcast. So we do weekly episodes. We'll have special guests in. Me and my producer, Sean Ollett, he does a great job, and we have a fantastic time. We'll have guests on coming up into the draft. Ian Cummings and Jacob Kamenker from the Draft Network and different guys like that come on, and we just have so much fun. I mean, honestly, football is one of the best and really the only sports out there that's just 12 months a year. We always have fun. And if you want some food takes, you want to talk about Coke Zero, vanilla sugar,
I'm a Coke Zero guy. Yes.
Listen, I found Coke Zero vanilla at my local grocery store, and I loaded up. I had to make it happen. So you want your take on vanilla Coke Zero? Come on over. And Andy, would love to have you on the podcast at any time.
I'm going to try that. So once again, thanks. And this has been NFL Outdated Coverage 2 series on the Washington Commanders. And we'll definitely have to catch you again. Thanks again.
No doubt about it. Thanks so much, Andy.